Good evening to the public. It's nice to have so many people here. So I call the regular city council meeting of Monday, September 18, 2023 to order at 5 p.m. Oh, Pledge of Allegiance. Matt, would you care to lead us in Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. May we have roll call?
Mayor Plummer,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Sagerstrom,
Here.
Councilmember Cruz,
Here.
Councilmember Hawkins,
I am here.
Councilmember Merrill.
Here. And the clerk's report on agenda posting, please.
At 12:37 p.m. on the 15th day of September 2023, the agenda was posted for today's City Council meeting in the window of City Hall for public view.
Thank you. Do I have council approval of the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Seconded.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. Passes unanimously. So, public comment. The public may address the council on any item of public interest. Can we turn that down just a little bit so it's not reverberating? Thank you. Of any public interest not otherwise on the agenda that is within the jurisdiction of the city. No action may be taken. Matters to be addressed may be referred to the city staff or placed on a subsequent meeting agenda. Speakers are limited to a 3-minute presentation. If participating via Zoom, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature or dial *9, then *6 to unmute. Thank you. Let's start with Zoom then, if we have any.
None on Zoom.
Okay, closing the Zoom session and coming to the council chambers. Do we have any public comment? Well, yay. Good to see you again.
Good evening. Oh, am I? Yeah, I'm on. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Katie Dunn, President of the Sonora Chamber of Commerce. And I'm here this evening to share a few things with you. One is at our last board meeting, our board approved unanimously to make all of our events in downtown Sonora smoke-free, vape-free. This does not mean that we are going to be enforcing that, but we will be just supporting it with the appropriate smoke-free and vape-free signs in and around each event. And we will also notify the community that the event is smoke-free and vape-free via signage, flyers, and or social media. So just wanted to share that with you. The other thing is tomorrow night is our joint mixer with the Columbia Chamber of Commerce. It's going to be at Heritage Self-Storage. It is right there at the Pedro Y behind the Dollar General. It's also going to be a ribbon cutting for them, a grand opening. So we're joining arms with our neighbors to the north, the Columbia Chamber of Commerce. There'll be live music and root beer floats and all sorts of goodies and raffle items. So I hope you can join us. And then lastly, our Trick or Treat Street for downtown Sonora is slotted for Saturday, October 28th. So I wanted to share that with you too. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the chamber.
Mr. Mayor, may I just
Yes,
make a
please.
comment? Oh, it was just a comment, Katie. So
I had one more thing.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I have a new board member with me this evening. His name is Matt Galvin. He's in the audience tonight, and he actually is. He owns Sierra Chit Chat and also is the digital marketing manager for Chicken Ranch Casino.
Okay,
He's a new
thank you,
board
and
member
thank you
of ours.
for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And I was just going to say, 15 years ago when I sat on the Sonora Chamber's board, that was a big thing being talked about was, a lot of the no smoking downtown. And it was actually a lot worse, as you remember, back even 15 years ago. But public opinion was of the sort of they wanted to leave smoking in. Now it seems to have gone the other direction, which I am really glad to see. So,
Thank you. So we have two presentations this evening. First is a presentation to receive regarding the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act initiative and consider a resolution in opposition. And Mr. Qualls is, Stephen Qualls of the League of California Cities is presenting it. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, great. Let's see if I can do this without messing it up. So you are my maiden voyage on this presentation, so please be gentle. Again, my name is Stephen Qualls, and I am your Central Valley Division Public Affairs Manager for the League of California Cities. I want to thank you very much for inviting me here to speak before you on ABA 13 and the CBRT ballot measures. Now, both of these are, well, I shouldn't say it. CBRT has qualified for the November 2024 ballot. ACA 13 has not. ACA 13 were originally supposed to be on the March 2024 ballot, but discussions went on with the governor's office, so it ended up being placed on the November 2024 ballot. But as we know in Sacramento, things are very fluid up there. I don't know if you remember the soda tax. The American Beverage Association put a ballot measure on the ballot to prohibit cities from enacting soda and sweet drink taxes, and it qualified, and eventually they made an agreement with the legislature to prohibit cities and counties from doing so for 10 years. So they withdrew the ballot measure off the ballot. So this could very well work out where they do work something out between them, and this may not ever end up being on the ballot. But as for now, it is, and we're going to assume that it's going to be moved forward. To the big button, right? It'll work. Somebody will blame that on somebody else. I guess it is me. Okay, great. Okay, let's see. Okay, as you can see, I'm going to cover the CBRT first, and then if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me while I'm going through the slides, and then I will cover ACA 13 secondly, and then I'll explain to you how the ballot's actually going to work out. So as you can see, this is one that we are opposing this here. We're doing so because it would amend the California Constitution. It also has provisions to limit the voters' authority, and I'll explain these in my next slide as to why I pointed these out to you. It's going to make it really hard for cities and counties to adopt new fees and taxes. It's going to put billions of dollars of taxes and fees at risk, and these are both taxes and fees that were previously adopted and will be nullified under this ballot measure, and then those that are moving forward. And as I said, this is qualified for the November 24 ballot. Okay, so this one undermines voters' rights, transparency, and accountability. The measure would limit voter input by prohibiting local advisory measures where voters provide direction to politicians on how they want their local taxes spent. It also invalidates the Upland decision. It changes current law to make it more difficult for local voters to pass measures needed to fund local services and local infrastructure. So the Upland decision was a decision in 2017, and it was the California Cannabis Code versus the city of Upland. And the California Supreme Court ruled that local ballot measures introduced by initiative process, so not placed on the ballot by city council or by the board of supervisors, but done by the citizens itself, and their special taxes can be a simple majority vote. So as you all know, any special taxes have to pass by 2/3 vote. This ruling said that as long as it's put on the ballot by the voters, it's a simple majority, 50% plus one. And this CBRT reverses that, says that all special taxes would have to be a 2/3 vote. It also says so currently cities are allowed or counties are allowed to put what they call advisory measures on a ballot. If they're running a special tax, they can do an advisory measure which says that the citizens can have, they set up advisory committees and the citizens can have a say in how that money is spent. Whereas a special tax is spent for one specific purpose. There's been a number of cities up and down in our area who have used those, where they had when they had general use taxes to help give the citizens a chance to be able to vote and have a say in how that money is spent. So one of the things about CBRT that we are opposed to is that it's retroactive back to January 1st of 2022. And so what that's saying, that any tax measure that is adopted after January 21st of 2022 and didn't have all the conditions of the CBRT, such as it has to have a sunset date, things like that, and they'd be null and void and invalidated. They'd have to go back to the voters, or they could be valid for 12 months and then they'd become null and void again. So these have to go back to the voters either in a special election or if there's another election coming up. It also, like I said, would have to have a sunset date. And then if you were to, the city of Sonora were to annex any new land, then any taxes and fees that are currently applied to the other citizens of Sonora would have to be voted on by those citizens and would have to be approved by them. So it also jeopardizes local and state services, and it reaches so far back into, like I said, ballot measures that have previously passed or ballot measures that may become in the future, that it could force cuts to public schools, fire and emergency response, law enforcement, public safety, public health, parks, libraries, mental health services. It could also reduce funding for critical infrastructure like streets and roads, public transportation, drinking water, new schools, and sanitation and utilities. So it also opens up doors for lawsuits and bureaucracy, because the language in the ballot measure is so vague. So to say everything, all fees and charges for services may not exceed the actual cost of providing that service. But it's so vague that we're not sure what it actually means, which means that it's going to open up cities and counties to possible lawsuits. There's things such as, let's say if something goes to your planning department, a development, the developer goes, well, the minimum cost for doing that would be the lowest person, if you have more than one person in the planning department, but the lowest paid person in the planning department, are they the ones who actually worked on my plans? Or was it the higher paid person who's got more experience, been there longer? So when you charge your fees, they're going to say, well, we should have had to pay for the newer employee who doesn't make as much, instead of paying for somebody who has more experience, who might be your top planner, like that. So that's how it opens up cities and counties to possible lawsuits and challenges for expenses. So I know that your staff did a great job in your staff report. So you've already seen this analysis by our lobbyist, Ben Trifo. But pretty much he's saying that when it comes to your Measure Y, there's a possibility that you could be taken to court over this, because in it said one of the conditions of the ballot measure is that if revenue from a tax can be spent for unrestricted general revenue purposes, in a statement saying only that the tax revenue can be spent for unrestricted general revenue purposes shall be included. And I understand that is not included in your Measure Y. So this could open up your Measure Y to lawsuits. We are fully expecting the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association to look at opportunities like this to be able to challenge ballot measures or measures that passed and like were passed after January 1st, 2022. So that's my report on California Business Roundtable's ballot measure. Are there any questions that I might attempt to answer?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that it seems to me one of the main reasons to be against something like this, at least here in Sonora, is that everything that this bill kind of says it wants to accomplish, we already did that as a people. Like we put Measure Y up to a popular vote. The people, by a majority vote, accepted it. And, I know that there's this difference between 2/3 and 50-50, but that is reason enough for me, if you do it right and you practice, transparent government, like I'd like to think we do here. This is not the greatest thing for a city like ours at all. So more of a comment, I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just was wondering, is there a wave of support behind it, or do we know, what the general public is thinking about this, or even if they're thinking about it at all? And how should we be lobbying ahead of it?
Yeah, the only poll I've seen shows that it's failing. There's very little support for it. You'll see that, so the League of California Cities has run two different ballot measures. First one was, I think, for me, 2004, where the state used to steal property taxes from local governments. And we ran a ballot measure and it passed like by 80 some odd percent. Ran another one to protect your gas taxes because they would take your gas taxes and never pay it back. And that passed by the high 70s. So we've shown, and I'll show you a more recent one. So when the voters approved the use of recreational marijuana or cannabis products, sorry, in the state of California, when the polling was done, when the ballot measure had strong local control measures in it, it pulled much higher than it did without those. And that's why those measures were in there, because those cannabis people, producers and distillers, wouldn't want those in there to put control on it. I mean, there's measures such that if you chose not to have cannabis businesses in your jurisdiction, you're allowed to do so. If you choose not to have deliveries into your jurisdiction, you're allowed to do so. Now, some of those things have been eaten away by the legislature, because they can do that if it's considered still within the intent of the original ballot measure. That's just an example of how the people, they support local government, and for local government to have control over what they do. So that's why people, I think, are looking poorly on this, because they're saying, hey, we want local government, the citizens especially, to be able to decide what they want to do. If the citizens want a ballot measure, put something on the ballot that they feel is important, they don't want it to have to be a 2/3 vote.
Yeah, Suzanne?
Can you tell me who wrote ACA 13? Where did it come from? Not the
The next
citizens.
one,
Yeah, not the citizens,
Yeah.
because
are you talking about CBRT or ACA 13?
Assembly Constitutional Amendment 13.
Yeah, that was written by the legislature.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Not the citizens. Unlike the taxpayer initiative, which had 1.4 million citizen signatures, the legislature. Thank you.
It had to be, to qualify. I don't know the exact number.
Was that the extent of your questions? Matt, any new ones in between?
No.
Okay, I had a couple questions. And one is, I'm feeling a little weak on the exact details. If we had passed Measure Y with the explicit unrestricted general revenue purposes clause, that would have been okay. Is that correct?
I'm not a legal expert, but so our lobbyists.
Yeah, I'm not asking for a legal
yeah.
opinion, just a general, I'm trying to get general information right now.
It appears so from what our lobbyists said.
Okay. And are all new revenue sources going to require a 2/3, a supermajority, or if we take that back to the voters, it passed at nearly 60%, and include that phrase, is that, I mean, maybe I'm asking for legal opinion as well, but can you go back, or is everything now going to require a supermajority?
The intent is to basically to take the initiative away from local government to create taxes. So the mechanism that was used through Measure Y wouldn't necessarily be available in the future to do it, irrespective of whether or not it had 60% support in the community.
Okay.
That's number one. I think fundamentally, there's serious constitutional questions on the legality of going back on taxes. So my legal inclination is that it is overbroad and unconstitutional, and to the extent that it goes back in time and invalidates things.
Something 2 years prior.
Right. So from that perspective, while we would always be concerned about the possibility of a legal challenge to Measure Y, and if it was ever deemed constitutional for a measure like this to be successful and roll back to Measure Y, I would expect that you would see somewhere in the range of 30 to 40% of cities go bankrupt. and not have a mechanism through which to provide the most basic levels of service to the citizens. I mean, I think it's important to understand that the California Business Roundtable, they have paid signature gatherers that stand outside supermarkets, often are misleading in terms of what the intent of what it does in terms to be able to qualify these things. They pay on average about $10 to $13 per signature that's put on there. Yeah. Steve Churchwell, my old partner, used to represent the signature gatherer, so I know all the details about what they pay. That was back in the day. So, I think that's just the framework that you have to look at. But if you were to interpret it in its broadest sense, I mean, and our firm's had great success against Howard Jarvis. But the case that Mr. Pauls was talking about with the Bureau of Cannabis Control, with some support from the league, you guys were part of the 25 jurisdictions filed against the Bureau of Cannabis Control to preserve local control. So so I think that I think there's a lot of legal questions in there, and if it's interpreted in its broadest sense, it's apocalyptic for local government. I think
Which may be
and if it's
educational
even
in a
if it's
different way.
not, it is a significant. If it was to ever pass, it's a significant handcuff.
Okay. Let's presume it passes. How long are the legal, I mean, this is just a wag, obviously, but legal challenges will last months or years or decades?
3 to 5 years.
Okay. So,
I mean, and all of these issues are ones that would go up to the California Supreme Court.
and would we likely get temporary restraining orders for any clawback features, for example?
Right.
So, which leads me to is a perfect segue to the next question of the probability of success for any of the clawback features, because there's been some talk of it, and that if it is annulled and doesn't pass within that 1 year time frame, then we would have to give it back somehow. Is that my understanding of that correct? As far as the understanding.
I understand the league's concerns. I am maybe a little bit more optimistic about us to defend mechanisms that were put in place in the past. That being said, I mean, the concern is real, right? I mean, and it's not with certainty that you can say that Measure Y would be protected. And so I think that you walk into this with the idea that Measure Y could be while we feel good about our ability to defend it, we cannot go into that fight with any level of certainty. And irrespective of that, the ability for the community to continue to make decisions on its own behalf, separate and apart from Measure Y, would be significantly curtailed. I mean, this is really not a taxpayer protection. This is a local government handcuff and taking the basic tools that they use for local municipalities, for those citizens in those communities to make decisions within their own community.
Okay, thank you. So I'm hearing that we shouldn't be terribly concerned about a clawback feature, which is one of the
I don't want to
scary.
underestimate it
No,
too,
okay.
because if it happens, we're bankrupt.
Right, but so a lot of other cities will be as well, or
Oh yeah, it'd be a big group. We won't
public
be alone.
entities
Yeah.
will be in a very bad way. And then the last question was, and I think I'm not too sure to whom I addressed this, but the new review basically by any annexed territory, is that approval just for the annexed part of new annexed territory for an entity, or would that nullify it for the entire district if it did not pass with the supermajority?
So, it's similar to what happens in water districts right now when you're basically selling your rights to a water district. So what happens is you have to in that situation, you have to establish what your water rate is going to be, and then everybody has to vote on it, and you have to approve it, or else the transfer doesn't go through. So, and that happens because you have water entities that are underfunded and they can't survive, and so then they wind up selling their water rights. In this situation, it's similar to that in the sense that basically all the voters in the area that's being annexed will have to approve basically the fees that they're going to be charged, and that becomes a core component to the annexation. For us, I'm not overly concerned about it. I think it's a bigger concern for urbanized areas where you're basically bringing in areas that have a lot of concentrated housing and growth and stuff like that. If we're to grow, you're looking more at greenfield development. And so there's not a whole bunch of people who are living there. And frankly, the major voter in that's going to be the developer of the project to start off with. So for communities that do greenfield development as opposed to urbanized development, I think that part of it's not as big of a concern. So it's a kind of a bigger city concern.
Okay.
On that one.
So it's only going forward at the point of annexation in any event, because you can't end up with an annex part, or at least for us, it would be impossible to have a new annexation and then them come along and say after the fact, well, we disagree with Measure Y, so it's annulled for the entire city.
Correct.
Okay, good.
It would kill the annexation.
Right.
It wouldn't kill Measure Y.
Right. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Okay.
Did that raise
I
any
have
other questions? Yes.
a few
Councilman
follow-ups.
Merrill.
And forgive me if I'm maybe oversimplifying this, but the whole like repealing taxes that were passed by popular majority that, going back to January 1st, 2022, wouldn't that just fall under like ex post facto? Like I thought that was something that was has been unconstitutional since forever, like Roman times.
So, I mean, I think for those of us who practice this area of law, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's effectively the argument, which is you can't undo something that was lawful at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Think of that as a criminal act. You can't create a criminal law and then go back in time and say, well, you did this, it was legal. Like, for instance, if we just ever made concealed weapon permits illegal, and then we said, if you had a concealed weapon permit
5
years ago, now you're all guilty of felonies, right? And you're going to put you in prison. Like you can't, you can't. I know. Yeah. So it might affect one or two people on the dais. And so that would be the overwhelming legal argument, which is that you can go forward in time, but you can't go backwards in time.
So that fills me with a little bit.
But that does not mean in California that we always win on that argument. So we still live in California.
The other points I wanted to make were, I guess, more comments, were that a 2/3 majority, at least as far as my experience goes, there are such few times in like popular measures, at least, like we've all voted in proposition general elections, and they're very rarely 67 33 splits. Like a super majority is so rare regardless of the resolution. So to me, this is almost like permanently strangleholding the ability for locals to self-govern. And that I'm fundamentally against that as a concept. I'm an American. The more rights we have locally, the better as far as I'm concerned. So I just, let's just say I think this is a very bold-faced attempt to completely just block any progress from happening.
Let's stick
locally.
to questions right now. We'll go to statements
and lastly, we, in my opinion, were incredibly transparent with Measure Y. I can speak on personal experience because I personally distributed over 700 of the fact sheets that the city provided, and we itemized. We itemized so many things it might as well have been unrestricted. Like, we wanted to help fire, we wanted to help police, we wanted to improve our infrastructure. So I think if that was ever to come up for question, like that, I don't know. I'm feeling very confident that this is just a bad idea, and hopefully we can say that we conducted ourselves as well as we possibly could have regarding how we tax our people. So that's it.
So I do have a small
Yes.
question, Mr. Mayor. So Doug, under what happened years ago with redevelopment and the possibility of, say, something like this passed and started bankrupting cities all over the state, and what happened with the laws with redevelopment. And it almost sounds conspiratorial, but it's in black and white, like you can read it. Like, how much closer does that get us to a state takeover of cities and counties?
So significantly closer. You know, I mean, the reality of it is there's been a huge movement by the state for the last 20 years to slowly move cities to regionalized governments. The way they fund things through the COGS, that's the way they fund things through the county. It's the way that they take money away. So, you know, like homelessness, it's not something that's funded that the cities get any money for, but yet we still get the crux of the problem to deal. So if you start to have a whole bunch of government entities going bankrupt, you either put them in state conservatorship or, you know, or judicial conservatorship, or in the alternative, they unincorporate. So, and which means at the end of the day, you have government that is further away. I mean, you know, so because the county is bigger than the city. So, as an example, so I think I think that that's a fair and accurate statement.
You know, I think that's the one big thing during that process when all of our redevelopment disappeared, you know, all over the state. And, you know, at first I got called conspiratorial. Oh, no, no, no. I'm like, look, read this. This is what the law states. And then when I hear things like this, I'm going, man, this is getting real. So just my 2 cents.
Well, oh, Mayor Pro Tem,
Yeah,
please.
I just wondered if the League of California Cities has any kind of strategy or plan for cities to educate their voters about this proposition.
Yes, we do. In fact, so this week we have our annual conference in Sacramento, and we have a number of sessions on CVRT and also on ACA 13. And then we have a whole media plan that we're moving forward with our stakeholders.
So I want to, if I could, Mayor, I want to add
Please.
something to that. I think it's really important for the public to understand that cities are battling business entities that can spend as much money as they choose to spend while not having any of the ability to put money, it's taxpayer money, towards doing anything other than providing fact-based information. So you can't engage in any kind of what would be deemed campaigning, you know. So as an example, we as a city couldn't dedicate $10,000 to a kitty to go run ads, you know, against this. And so that's the limitation that the league has against it when its membership basically can't put money into political advocacy on behalf of the city. So I wanted to add that on because people always say, well, you guys should be doing more. And the fact of the matter is we're not legally allowed to because it's taxpayer money and it's supposed to go for services. It can't be used for political purposes.
So does that mean that the league is also limited by the same rules that would apply to us as a city? Because
so they can,
right, okay,
but
that's
their entire membership
right.
can't provide them money from their
Yes.
funds to
Los Angeles can't take $100 million and put it in an ad campaign.
So I can answer that. We don't use any public funds,
Right,
but
okay.
that comes from our PAC. And I'm going to get a little punch in here. We have a golf tournament on October 5th, if any of you would like to play.
Oh, please.
Mr. White has played with us before. And and that's where all that is paid for is we join forces with other stakeholders in order to do that. I was going to bring it with, but I want to let you know that the cost of running a campaign has grown exorbitantly in the last 10 years, or even the last 6 years. It's crazy what they're getting for some of the signatures. And one of the reasons being is that there's so many ballot measures out there right now. And they were paying upwards of $20 a signature at one time. for people. That's why you see people out front of Walmart, because they're making a lot of money doing selling those things. And it's just the cost, and the media course has gone up to get any kind of print media or TVs and stuff like that. It's crazy how much it costs to run a campaign right now. It's insane. Just a signature gathering alone, and then to get it over the finish line is very, very costly for any organization.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad you had a chance to also plug your fundraiser, because it's rather important. Doug, or Mr. White?
My name.
Yes, I know, but it seems so informal, and you alluded to the organizations and all that, and I thought perhaps you could go a little deeper into that, because my initial reaction to the first whereas in this was that this is just, trying to think of the right word. Oh, gracious, I'm too tired. But infighting between different social groups and sort of the politics of envy, and rich corporations are doing this to just get their own in. Who is that, and is that a statement of fact or one of more political bent?
Well, it's definitely not political bent. I mean, I don't think that this is a Democrat or Republican issue.
No, I wasn't
In that
thinking of
sense,
it in that sense. It's just class warfare is the term I was trying to come up with, where
I wouldn't even call it class warfare because government entities are somewhat, in this one, the rights that are being taken away are from effectively mostly cities and special districts.
Okay, but I'm referring to the first whereas an association representing California's wealthiest corporations and developers is spending millions to push a deceptive proposition. And so that, like I said, see, if that's a statement of fact, then I have no problem with it. Whereas if it's sort of a class warfare, let's bend the influence a little bit, then I would rather see it deleted. But
so I think it really comes down to how you interpret basically the language. I mean, I think the best way of indicating it is if you read this initiative and you view it as a taxpayer protection and government accountability act, and you don't believe that that title is deceptive in terms of what it actually is doing, then it's fine, right? If you believe that that is deceptive in terms of what's trying to actually be accomplished, then I think it's fair to call it deceptive. I think that's an individual choice for everybody, and different people can form different conclusions based off of kind of like their senses. I mean, at the bottom line, you don't spend tens of millions of dollars unless you have a financial interest to save, right? And so this is not an initiative that's done out of the good of somebody's heart or because they believe that somehow they are making the world a better place. They're doing it because they believe that they can save money long term. And it's a financial bottom line issue, like many of these. So, I mean,
I'm trying to pin this down, and I'm feeling that I'm not doing it very successfully. These corporations, are we talking about Microsoft, for example, or a name that we're all going to recognize, or is it a corporation of?
Mostly in this case, it's mostly developers.
Okay.
So it's mostly land development people who are looking, as they said, to basically be able to make development cheaper. Probably not realizing, I look at the philosophy in this as cutting off your nose to spite your face. So you make development potentially cheaper, and you limit future government exactions, but you make communities that are unsafe
Or
and,
unstable.
and unable to provide basic services that you're trying to get people to buy homes.
Okay.
So it kind of like, I guess in the short term, for the first 10 years, maybe it works. But long term, when, as local entities fail and as, services get cut back, I think you wind up becoming more like Vallejo than in Stockton, than you wind up looking like Sonora.
Okay. Thank you very much. Um,
Now, some of that's just my opinion. So,
And
so I guess not necessarily legal advice. So,
and I appreciate it as such. I mean, I was asking somewhat vague questions, looking for sort of background and whether the first blush of opinion that I had was right or wrong. You know, just that type of language usually means it's sort of fraught with political influence or trying to push a point. And that's why I wanted to try and nail it down as best I could.
So as your legal counsel, let me tell you my philosophy. Anything that takes power away from you as a city council or this city is bad. Bottom line.
I think
So if it means that if the city
Yep.
of Sonora by 50% plus one decides it wants to raise taxes, that means a majority of the citizens have made that decision for better or worse. And that's my job to protect that right? And not to have somebody from outside of the community come in and tell you what you're going to do. So fundamentally, that's why I, as a city attorney and legal counsel, oppose this measure. That doesn't mean that everybody has to agree with me, because there are things that, from a taxpayer perspective, I can understand how somebody might have some favorable attributes. But you also have to understand the full consequence of it. A lot of things sound good until the practical application.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Or, well, let's take it to public comment. Do we have any public comment on this issue? Seeing none, either on Zoom nor in the chamber, I will close public comment. Madam
I think
Eads,
Mr.
you had,
So I just
Mr.
wanted to
Quells
remind you, Mayor, that we do have the section on ACA 13 to continue as well.
He
Okay.
needs to continue.
okay. Sir, please continue. I'm
Oh,
sorry,
I love
Mr.
the
Qualls,
debate.
yes.
I think it's great. It's what America's built on.
What?
Okay, so we move on to ACA 13, which is named the Protect and Maintain the Majority Vote Act. So what this does is, as I was telling you earlier, so this retains the majority vote requirement for passage of state and local initiative. Those would be the general use taxes, such as they are. So this would require that the ones that do, if a ballot measure is placed in the ballot, it requires to increase the threshold for approval by the voters. CBRT is saying the courts ruled that initiative by the voters placed on the ballot could be 50% plus one. CBRT wants to raise that to 2/3, just as a special tax. So what ACA 13 says is if a ballot measure wants to raise the threshold for approval, that ballot measure has to pass by the same amount. In other words, it's saying ACA 13, I'll get to this at the very end, if ACA 13 ends up getting more votes than CBRT, then CBRT would fail. Okay. There is an instance I'll show you later on where if they both pass by a supermajority, then ACA 13 would win, but then there's just have to be a 2/3. But if ACA 13 gets more votes than CBRT, CBRT is dead. Also, this ACA 13 also preserves the right of cities to place advisory questions on the ballot. That's something that CBRT takes away, which is currently an option for cities. So currently, a ballot measure that moves to increase thresholds for future measures can pass with a simple majority. ACA 13 would retain the majority vote, but any measure seeking to increase thresholds for approval would have to pass by the same threshold. For example, a measure that would impose a 2/3 threshold on future measures would also have to pass the same 2/3. That's what I mentioned earlier. And I said, so it retains the ability to place advisory measures on the same ballot as the general tax. Cities and counties often place non-binding advisory measures on the ballot to allow voters to weigh in on various issues. It's a critical tool to allow voters to advise local government. And that is my presentation on ACA 13. I'm prepared to take any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Any questions on?
I just have a lot of comments, so.
Okay, well, we will have lots of time afterwards for our general comments.
I do have more when you're done with that.
Well, okay,
Just quick rundown on the ballot
So-
itself.
please forge ahead then, because at this
Okay.
point we have no further questions.
So this is what happens. This is how the election night's going to work. And this is going to be clear as mud to you. I've done some presentations and it just, people can't wrap their heads around it. I tried to simplify it as much as I could, so I'm hoping it's going to make sense to everybody. So if ACA 13 gets 55%, CBRT gets 54%, ACA wins. All provisions of ACA 13 would take effect and CBRT would fail. If CBRT gets 55% and ACA 13 gets 54%, all provisions of CBRT would take effect and ACA 13 would fail. Now, if ACA 13 gets 68% and CBRT gets 67%, which is over the 2/3 threshold required by ACA 13, both would pass. And any future measures that seek to raise thresholds for voter approval, I know, that seek to raise threshold for voter approval would have to pass by the same threshold. So as CBRT, as ACA 13 is trying to do with CBRT, CBRT would still pass, but that 2/3 threshold, it would have to be met with CBRT would have to, and any future ballot measure would have to pass by 2/3. And then all special taxes would have to pass by a 2/3 vote, which is what is in CBRT. So if it's an issue placed on the ballot by the voters, any special tax would have to pass by 2/3. Where under current law, because of the Upland decision, it's 50% plus one. And advisory measures would be allowed to be on the ballot because under ACA 13, that's what it is in the ballot. Is that, are you clear on it now?
Right.
I'm sorry, I tried to get it as simple as I could. So if you have any questions on the ballot, ACA 13 or CBRT, I'm here to answer those for you.
This is more for Melissa. On page item 1, you say a resolution of the Sonora City Council opposing initiative 210042A, and he's talking about ACA 13 and CBRT. Does that reference those two?
So the California Business Roundtable, they're the authors of the Taxpayer Protection and Accountability Act, Taxpayer Protection Government Accountability Act.
So this initiative number is
So when he
referring to
says
that.
CBT, the California Business Roundtable, he's referring to the Taxpayer Protection Government Accountability.
Sorry, I should have been more clear on that.
Yes. So the resolution, if you would like to consider it, would be opposing that legislation.
Initiative 210042A.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Merrill.
I just thought of something to maybe help frame the importance of just passing things by a simple majority. We're a body of 5 members, correct? So let's say we have a 3-2 vote on something. That would never meet the requirements of 2/3, just mathematically. We couldn't do that. Every single bill would have to pass by a 4-to-1 majority. And luckily, we've been unanimous on a lot of things, or had a pretty strong majority. And that's something I take a lot of pride in as a legislator. But if we were to subject city council to the same requirements, you do the math. Like that it literally would stranglehold us. It limits our ability to do our job. And I'm reading ACA 13
Andy,
right now, and it sounds pretty great for
Okay.
what it's worth. You could look it
This
up
is
on
not for all law, legislation, or public decisions. This is only for raising taxes.
Sure, but ACA 13, I'm just reading the resolution here. Like it actually has some really cool things that like constitutionally authorize local governments to submit questions to voters for asking their opinion on issues of governments. That's word for word in what this bill is in terms of ACA 13, and that's huge. Like, I want to hear the public's opinion, and if we have something here, again, I'm kind of skimming, but it seems like there's a lot of great language in this bill as opposed to the initiative measure to have the supermajority. And just based on that alone, I'd support the resolution that's been put before us today. That's huge.
Is that the end of the presentation, or am I
No,
eagerly awaiting more? I don't
No,
want to
I'm
jump the
just here
gun
for
again.
for any questions you might have. Again, thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. Great conversation. I love having the input from all of you, and I hope that you will support the League of California Cities in opposing the Taxpayers Protection Act and supporting the AC 13. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us and the presentation. Any further discussion from the council? Well, okay. Let me call for public comment first, please.
All I wanted to say was that measure is 4 pages long, AC 813, okay. 4 pages. So you can read it.
You can do that when we have the regular comment from and discussion among the council. Do we have any public comment online?
None online.
None online. In the council chambers? Seeing none, I will close public comment. Councilman Merrill, you have the floor.
Oh, like I said, that was it. It's AC 813. If you go on leginfo.legislature.ca.gov, they have the whole bill on there. I just kind of skimmed it. And again, it adds very specific language from what I understand, one of which being it says, hey, local governments can poll our citizens. That's huge to me. You know, what are we here to do? We're here to represent. We're here to ask the public what they want. We did that with Measure Y. We got resounding support for it. So I think we're hopefully going to make the right decision on these 2 pieces of legislation.
Well,
Please, Mayor Pro
I was
Tem
following up with Suzanne's query. It says consider a resolution. What does that mean?
So opportunity is yours to discuss and consider approval of the resolution as attached. If you would like to modify the resolution, if you would like to give direction to staff to come back with a modified resolution, or if you would like to just accept the presentation. It's up to your discretion.
Well, I was just going to say, if you dislike the Californians' wealthiest corporations and developers, you can just say, whereas a powerful association is spending millions, and delete the possible political ramifications.
So I think that's a wonderful suggestion and would happily endorse it if the rest of the council finds that appropriate.
Sure. I don't think it's really about corporations personally.
Okay.
So.
Well, if we focus on the essence of local control and then the other provisions that are in it, which to me, the whole clawback provisions and annulling anything in the past, 2 years prior, is not something I support for anything I can envision right now. So I would very much like to do that, and otherwise I support the resolution for myself. Madam Cruz, you're looking like you're eagerly wanting to say something, so please.
Yeah, so I've been listening quite a bit, and I just have some statements for the citizens. So this is a double-edged sword. If we vote for, we're not voting tonight, let me clarify that. But when it comes up on the ballot, what you citizens will be voting for and against. The Taxpayer Protection Act, if you vote for it, then you're going to be eliminating Measure Y and eliminating our police. If you vote against the ACA 13, then in essence, apparently, from what I've read, you're going to be protecting your property taxes. And we know that from our parents and our grandparents that when you lived in California, your property taxes were so sky high. Every time your house was reassessed, you had to pay more in property taxes, which was forcing people to flee. But even more than that, it had to do with the 2/3 vote and levying taxes on small cities. So in order to play the devil's advocate, this is what people who wrote the Taxpayer Protection Act had to say. Less than 2 weeks ago, radical progressives in the California legislature launched the most brazen sneak attack on California's iconic Proposition 13 in its 45-year history. Assemblyman Christopher Ward, backed by the new Speaker of the Assembly, Robert Reeves, introduced Assembly Constitution Amendment 13, ACA 13. It would amend the Constitution to make it easier to raise taxes by making it harder to pass citizens' initiatives that seek to enforce Proposition 13's two-thirds vote requirement for local special tax increases. The specific target of ACA 13 is the citizens' initiative backed both by taxpayer organizations and the business community. The TPA government accountability has already qualified for the November ballot, and polling shows it to be popular with voters. The TPA closes several loopholes created by the courts that have allowed special interests to work with local governments to raise taxes with a simple majority vote instead of two-thirds votes required by Proposition 13. I remember my parents screaming in joy when Proposition 13 was passed. So this is just a little bit about the other side of the story. Further, it says California politicians are trying to confuse voters by placing two initiatives on the ballot that would both gut Proposition 13 and make it easier to raise state and local taxes, as well as increase your utility rates. It goes on. I will say that the Taxpayer Protection Act was created by citizens, and it's really, really hard to go out and get names. And I know they have said that, well, we pay people to sign an initiative or those signatures, the pledges. But there's a lot of people who sign it that actually are for it. So according to the documents that I have, it's 1.4. So even if you got rid of the 0.4, that's still a lot of citizens voting. ACA, on the contrary, was created by the legislature. So I actually will be abstaining from this because I believe citizens should be citizens. And being a citizen is a huge burden, but it's also a blessing. And when our founders fought to take power away from central government, the monarchy, and gave it back to the citizens, it required us to read. And this is very complex on both sides. And I think games are being played on both sides, and word games that we can't even decide in this room. I don't like the words deceptive proposition in this resolution. I think it's taking sides, and we need to let the citizens decide that. I also don't like the California League of Cities letter to us earlier that says the only thing it protects is large corporations trying to avoid paying their fair share. I don't like that wording either. Take sides. So in closing, I will say this. Citizenship requires you, the citizens, to research the Taxpayer Protection Act, the original intent, and what it means for you citizens. It will also require you to research ACA 13. As a constitutional republic, we are required to be involved and informed when it comes to our government. I wish it to be noted that I've stated my opinion and now urge our local citizens to read, and become informed and judge accordingly to the whole of the situation and the persons involved. And I will be abstaining my vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Cruz. Any other discussion? Nope.
No. Just one quick comment. When we say 1.4 million people voted for this, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I could look it up.
Sign.
Yeah, signed the petition. I think the population of San Jose is around 1 million right now. And maybe if you included, some of the outlying communities like, maybe Morgan Hill or Alum Rock, Campbell, Fremont, that sort of thing, maybe you'd get to 1.4 million. So just when we put this in context, California has what, like 40 million plus people. So if we want to talk about majorities and what's popular, that would be the equivalent of letting the greater San Jose area dictate the policies in the rest of the state. And if that seems fair to you, then I don't know, again, maybe that's an oversimplification, but just to kind of give people something to compare, like the actual numbers of,
So I think.
It's not
I
really
think
even the
you're-
point. The point is that the citizens made this happen. So you could say it's 5. But when you live in a constitutional republic, citizens' voices matter.
exactly. And
Well-
when the legislature, writes bills, it's due to them being elected to represent the general
Okay, but
public. And I think there's more districts that were involved in the crafting of ACA 13 than there were in the initiative measure. But again, they represent a wider area of California just on the authors of the bill.
Okay,
You know,
but you misrepresent the entire issue when you talk about 1.4 million dictating for what the rest of the state, what's going to happen to the rest of the state. It's whether or not we're actually going to discuss an issue and then vote on it. And I think that's a fairer representation than to say that if they can get something on the ballot, that's dictating the rest, what happens to the rest of the state. Just like we took Measure Y, we voted to ask our constituents to approve it, and they did. But they always had the choice to go against it, and we would have struggled some other way. So, with that,
Can I make one
Please.
factual statement?
did I misstate something?
Did not.
Oh, okay.
More for the public. This is all very
Mhm.
then vote no on.
And since we have a huge public that watches bated breath every instant of our meetings, I look forward to hearing from each and every one of them. Thank you for that clarification, though.
And I endorse Suzanne's comments about voters educating themselves and not going into the ballot booth or sitting at their dinner table without looking into the issues, reading the 4 pages of ACA and contemplating what the other ballot initiative could do. So, I think that's one thing that has really struck me since being on city council is so many citizens wait around for other people to make the decision. And this is something that will affect us all. And maybe if it's as easy as voting no on both of them, hey, but you should read the issues and make the decision yourself.
Both well-made points. I would just bring it back to the practical aspect where, for the city of Sonora, this was passed quite overwhelmingly. We were just a point and a half away from 60%, and it is strongly supported. The taking away the control and putting our future based on this in limbo for some, what was it, 3 to 5 years you estimated, is not going to be good for the city. To vote in the interest of the city and in a certain sense self-interest, either voting for the status quo or against it, is probably the best. That said, the research into it is going to be lengthy and tedious, pick and shovel work, with a little reluctance. So I would like to adopt the language changes for the first whereas that you suggested. Just make it a little more neutral. And with that, I think we are time to look for a motion.
I'll move to approve the proposed resolution
With the amended.
with the amended first clause.
Just for clarification, the first clause would now read, whereas a powerful association is spending millions to push a deceptive proposition aimed for the November 2024 statewide ballot.
With that, I would look for a second. If it fails for lack of a second, there we go. Yeah. So, okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Nay. Any abstained?
Abstain.
There we have it. Thank you, and thank you for coming and enduring with us. So have a safe trip home.
I just shut down my, I know.
With that, we move on to our second presentation concerning the Ralph M. Brown Act, the Sonora Handbook of Rules and Procedures, the Rules of Decorum, and Meeting Procedures. Our attorney, Douglas White.
I think I'm gonna go up there for this. I think.
Okay.
You all right with that, Mayor?
No.
Not really.
Well, Councilor White, this is doubtless where everyone in the town will be dialing in.
Oh, yeah. You were, but- Let's just keep the camera on the presentation and not necessarily on me.
You're in charge of that.
No, I think we're like, picture. Huh? It does not, you don't get. This is not 2 hours. It is not, I wouldn't want to deprive you of the opportunity to hear this again. So, it's been a while since, we've done kind of some council training, kind of gone over some of the basic rules. I want to commend the city in terms of their adherence to the Brown Act and things of that nature. Sonora has always been one of my most adherent, clients that we represent. You guys have always been really, really good at that. But I think we wanted to have some kind of a refresher to kind of go into some of the other rules. I mean, I think my overarching kind of theme is going to be our handbook needs some work to kind of beef it up and to kind of conform it with some new laws. But we know that staff, Melissa has, a tremendous amount that's on her plate, and our meetings in the future are going to be both meaty and and healthy in terms of the topics that we're going to cover. So I don't know that it's at the top of the list, but it needs to. I'm going to walk into this conversation saying it's something that needs to be on. We need to do in the near future. So with that, let's just get right into it. So these are the topics that we're going to go over. City council, city manager, form of government. I'll go through that one pretty quickly because it's pretty evident. Brown Act, which again, I want to say, we have quite a few clients, cities, but I think Sonora has always excelled at, their Brown Act adherence. So that's something that I'm really proud of here. I think I've already kind of hinted at, where we're going on the handbook rules of procedure, which is that there's some deficiencies and that we need to deal with in the future and update for law and just be a little bit more thorough. And then we're going to just talk about Robert's Rules of Order, how we do our meetings and stuff like that. So the first one. So under a council administrator form of government, the elected body, which, for you guys, it's the city council, is responsible for establishing policy, passing ordinances, resolutions, contracts involving money. All those things require a majority of the council. So we're 5 members, but if we're down a member, those things would still require 3 votes. And you really set the policy and the vision for the city. Not necessarily responsible for the day-to-day operations that falls to the city administrator. And you're not the principal risk management function that largely falls on me as a city attorney. But you set the direction. You are the sails to the ship, right? And so that's what it goes. And then the mayor, which here is not an elected position but a rotating position. They are the ceremonial leader for the city. I mean, there are mine and Melissa's as your city attorney and city administrator, primary contact for day-to-day city business. So they're the representative of the council in terms of being the primary contact so that we don't break the Brown Act. so they're the most informed. It doesn't mean we don't inform you guys on other stuff, but they're always informed. And they perform ceremonial functions, and the primary one is the mayor's responsible for running the meeting. That also applies to whoever is the chair of your committees, or presiding officer, so your planning commission chair, and any of the other ad hoc committees and things of that nature. So it's a ceremonial position, but there is some substantive to it, but they're still equal. You all are one vote. And so they can't make decisions in and of themselves. I also think it's important that no council member can represent the council as a whole absent an action from the council. And that council member needs to identify that I'm only speaking for myself. I can't speak for council. Can't leave that impression. The council has two primary employees, even though I'm contract, I'm going to use employee in the generic sense instead of the specific legal definition of employee, because I would be considered, contractor. And that's the city administrator position, and then the city attorney. So we're the two people that y'all hire, and I have authority over nobody except for the people in my office. But Melissa is in charge of everything else on the day-to-day operations. And to be very clear, because I'm not here on a day-to-day basis, even though in an org chart they would show our positions as equal, they are not. Melissa, I rely on Melissa as your city attorney to kind of tell me what's going on a day-to-day basis, to give me authorization and direction on kind of what we're supposed to do in the confines of the council. So even I take direction from Melissa in her capacity as city administrator. City administrator is done by contract as well as I'm done by contract. We just have different types of contracts. So with that, I already talked about, the city attorney's role. My job is effectively to be what I call overall risk management, to make sure that we're doing things that are legally compliant. And you'll see some of my recommendations pervade, how the handbook is written, why it's written the way it is, and we'll talk a lot about that in terms of why we follow Rosenthal's rules of order, but we aren't directly governed by them. So we'll talk about that later. But those are all risk management things. I attend city council meetings, make sure things are followed. So I assist the mayor in making sure that the meetings are done legally. And so that's kind of my role. And while I am, as city attorney, appointed as an individual, my entire team effectively operates as deputy city attorneys, and they can step in for me on areas where they have more expertise. So when we get into litigation, and you'll see more of Nubia, and you'll see more of Angela. When we get into HR issues, you'll see more of Deborah. So it just depends on the issue. When it comes to development, it's always me, and I'm always your primary, and nobody else gets that right. Because I've enjoyed a long tenure here that I plan on continuing. So that's that. I'm just gonna quickly ask if there's any questions so that it doesn't get conflated. This would just be for council when we can open up for, we'll do the whole presentation, then open up for the public if you're all right with that, Mayor. Just following the presentation that's on there. No, you don't have to worry about that at all. No. Yeah, so this is kind of a summary of a lot of this stuff. I mean, if you've read it, you'll know it's deficient. And there's areas that need to be improved, and it's not updated for laws. Like I said, we'll talk a little about it when we get to there. Any questions on the form of government? Okay. So that kind of forms the background, and then we get into the Brown Act. So we know what kind of government that we have now. You all are elected by the public. You are the public's representative for the city of Sonora, all 5 of you. The planning commission is appointed by you, and they serve at your pleasure. And that goes for all of the committees and ad hoc committees and things of that nature. The Brown Act is how we run meetings and how we ensure public transparency. I look at the Brown Act more as a minimum than as a maximum. There are parts of it that make very hard to do business. And to be very candid, it makes government in the United States in general is set up to not be the most efficient. We are not trying to be an efficient corporation. We are trying to create roadblocks to new laws on purpose so that there's a lot of public input and there's a lot of public transparency. And that's what we're fighting for. And because of that, it makes us slow. It makes it more expensive to operate. But the idea is that the product is better because people have a say in the outcome, and they have to be given information. So that's the premise. So the Brown Act is very constrictive by intention. Okay, so let's keep going. So the Brown Act is essentially to provide access to government agencies and prohibit secret government decisions. Even though, so in the broadest way, it's to make sure that the people's business, the business that you are elected to conduct, or that people are doing as surrogates for you, is done with an opportunity to be at a scheduled meeting, with the opportunity to be heard, to have meaningful input that is going to be considered when decisions are made. What that means then is we want to prohibit backroom discussions where deals are cut or people know how people are going to vote, and the meaningful discussions happen in private instead of the public. Obviously, it makes certain conversations awkward, right? Again, by intention, right? It means that our meetings are sometimes slower because conversations or information that could be maybe readily had in private happen in public, right? And again, all by design. So there are serious consequences when people don't follow these rules. You could have a misdemeanor. There is a way in which it could go up to a felony, although very rare to see that happen. There can be civil action and liability. There can be an invalidation of the government decision, and obviously there's damage to reputation and public perception. The main enforcer of the rules in the Brown Act would be yourselves, right? First and foremost, so you're kind of like in charge of self-governance. If there's a lot of breaking of the rules, well, and it would be the mayor specifically, on certain things. Beyond that, if we're getting into really like backroom deals, it could be the DA, it could be the grand jury, civil grand jury, unless it's criminal, and then it would be the criminal grand jury. And then it could be potentially the California Attorney General. Me as your city attorney, I am a civil attorney. I have absolutely zero criminal power. And so the only thing I can do is represent the city before individuals on the council within the construct of their them performing their duties before like the grand jury and stuff like that. We've actually effectively changed a lot of the grand jury laws with the ability to bring counsel into grand jury hearings to get advice and stuff like that, instead of having to do the stupid thing where you would set out in the hall and then they would leave in the middle of the meeting to go talk to you outside. So that was our firm. Changed those. So Brown Act requirements, it applies to all government bodies in the state of California, well, with the exception of the legislature. They exempt themselves out of a lot of stuff. There is some stuff that applies to them. But this is the one that provides, that's specific to cities and counties and special districts. And there are exemptions where we go into closed session and talk about it. Usually things that deal with litigation, real estate deals, HR issues that must be kept confidential. So those are always agendized, and that's what we do at the beginning of the meeting, like an hour before, when we have those items to talk about. And the issue is that there's a public interest in those things. Most of, if not all, most of those things, with the exception of some of the HR stuff, wind up becoming public afterwards, or when a final decision is made, we have to go and make public. But just for the public's who's watching or who's riveted here in our audience, the thing, I mean, obviously if you're trying to negotiate a real estate deal, we're not required to compromise the city's negotiating position by doing that in an open meeting. That's why we get to go into close. It actually saves taxpayer money and dollars. Same thing with litigation. But when that happens, it's got to be cited in the agenda, and there's sometimes, very specific exemptions that can apply when immediate action is required. The main component of a lot of this is to make sure that people are properly noticed so that they can get on a list and they can show up at the meeting if they have something that they want to let know. So what constitutes a meeting? There's a whole series of different things, but face-to-face gatherings, telephone calls, emails, collective bargaining, our informational gatherings. These can all constitute a meeting. To the point when, as you all know, we kind of tell you or encourage you to not necessarily be friends with each other like on social media, because if you like something or somebody accidentally comments on something, it's all the question of whether or not you were conducting city business and whether or not that forms a meeting and violates the Brown Act. Again, Sonora has always been at the top of trying and following the rules, and I won't tell you who's at the bottom, but you guys have always been at the top of following the rules. Well, and this is the social media part about just, it can be as simple as emojis, thumbs up, likes have been interpreted by the court to be actions that would constitute violating the Brown Act. So that's why we talk about social media and why it can be really restrictive. But again, while most of us from a practical standpoint think as a human being it seems impractical and goofy, from a realistic standpoint of making sure the people's business done, it's probably better to be more cautious. So while it's frustrating, it is our rules and it's what we have to work with. And serial meetings, I think that this can happen because, one way people have tried to get around the rules is because you are allowed to talk to one other. Like we have a member of city business, you guys are always allowed to talk to one other person. But when you have serial communications, which is, a series of you start talking to each other. So, the mayor calls, Councilmember Hawkins calls, Councilmember Cruz, and Councilmember Cruz calls, Councilmember Sagerstrom, and Councilmember Sagerstrom calls Councilmember Mayor, and you're all talking about the same thing, and you're sharing information about the previous conversation. Oh, I heard this and I heard that. That would be example of a serial meeting. Or if you're going into meetings and it's called what's a hub and spoke type of meeting, which developers are notorious for doing. They'll go and meet with several of you and they'll ask you your opinion and get how you're voting, and then they'll know how people are going to vote before they actually do, which is why we always recommend and tell you never tell anybody. You should, while you may have an idea of how you're going to vote, you should never make your final decision until you've heard public comment, and then you form your your final decision kind of after that time when it's appropriate. You should always, and you're kind of legally required to keep an open mind during this process and be open to the idea that somebody could say something that would change your mind. So serial meetings are strictly prohibited because it's again, most of this stuff is happening outside of the public eyes. I will say it's something that commonly happens in other cities by accident. I will just say almost every city has technical violations of the Brown Act, overwhelmingly, which is just unintended and circumstantial. And people do say something and I didn't know, because, it requires you to be really, really careful to be 100% compliant. So examples, again, we talked about the daisy chain, which was my first example, and then we talked about the hub and spoke, which isn't to say like you can't go and meet with a staff member to go and talk about a particular issue. It's more when you're getting into the decision making and, hey, I hear mayor's going to vote this way and I hear this is going that way. That's where we kind of cross the line. You're always allowed to individually meet with staff members and gather information and get questions answered, but you're not allowed to kind of like go in and form conclusions and say how you're going to vote, which means that you formed an opinion before the public's had an opportunity to present another perspective to you potentially. Okay. So what does not constitute a meeting? Conversations that do not involve public agency business. So you can, it's completely appropriate. I wouldn't suggest it, but I've had it happen in another city where council members would go have a cocktail with each other after a meeting, or maybe go grab a quick dinner afterwards, or a majority of them would. And I'd get these pictures sent to me, telling me how my council member's in trouble. But they would go and it was just their opportunity to go and talk about their kids. So while I would never suggest it because of public, because of the perception of, you all sitting together right after a meeting, kind of downloading, how are they not going to talk about it? From a legal perspective, if you're going and having drinks with each other or coffee with each other or breaking bread with each other and you're talking about your families, and then that's completely appropriate. That's not about public business. So that can happen. Again, I think you always have to be mindful of perception. So just because something's legal doesn't mean you should do it, right? So conferences open to the public. You can absolutely, attend those, and you can all 5 be there, and you can speak for yourself as a citizen. Again, you can't speak for yourself. You can't speak for the council unless the council's taken an action and voted on it, but you can speak for yourself. And then social or ceremonial, occasions, you can go and do those things. So that's it on that. And then closed session, the major exemptions that we've talked about, which, again, we get to talk, but you have to talk in private. You can't reveal what happens in closed session to anybody. You're bound by confidentiality rules, and you can get in big trouble for doing it. And more people get in trouble for violating closed session than anything else of the elected officials that do it. So it'd be personnel matters, which obviously, if you talk about that, creates additional litigation risk, because not only have you revealed, broken the Brown Act and violated the confidentiality, but you probably violated some employee rights. Potential litigation, and that has the potential of you talking about it, so, compromising the city's legal position. Existing litigation, same thing, real estate negotiations. You could force the disclosure of information could cause the city to wind up paying more money for something or get less money for something. Labor negotiations and public safety threats, which I think goes without saying. You don't want to talk about that. So those are the major exemptions. There are others, but those are the major ones. And then there's a whole new way of doing business, following COVID. The great allowances that existed for COVID are now gone. And so you can still do the old way. So I have a point, their next meeting is going to be doing it the old way, which requires putting in the agenda where you're going to be, public posting where you're going to be, anyone has the right to come and attend the meeting at your location, even if it's your home. So you have to open up your home during that meeting for somebody to attend in that place. So those rules still apply, but there's a whole group of post-COVID rules that apply when there's emergencies, or there's been just cause, or you're ill, disabled, childcare, or you're traveling for business or agency that allows you to call in. The real thought was, people were going to continue to get sick and get COVID, and you don't want to force somebody or compromise their ability to represent the city and their position. So that they would have to come down to a meeting and be sick and expose everybody else to illness. So that's why these exemptions apply, but candidly, they don't get used very more because they're pretty hard to comply with. Like, increasingly, unless it's a really rare situation, we've just gone back to suggesting that people do it the old school way, which is putting it in the agenda and opening up whatever place posting. So those are the two ways that somebody can be not physically present. And when I say that, as you know, I mean, many people who are on stuff like that maybe ask the question, because I will often apply or be on remotely to save the city money from travel costs and stuff like that. This only applies to elected officials or appointed officials acting in their capacity. It doesn't apply to staff or consultants. So you're still able to take advantage of, in my case, cost savings by me not driving up here, by me attending remotely. So it doesn't apply to me, those rules. I don't have to open up my home, if I'm zooming in from home for the meeting or my office. So there's a higher standard for the elected and appointed officials. Any questions on that before we get into the handbook?
Yeah, I just wanted a little bit of clarification on the Brown Act when it comes to say for instance, the Board of Supervisors, if we wanted to go and speak there, those kinds of things, or even like our own city subcommittees like Vision Sonora and stuff, say hypothetically, if I was vice chair of Tuolumne County Transit Council and wanted to hear input from a committee like Vision Sonora that's responsible for aesthetics and things like that, and I had a related project, how would the kosher way for me to go about doing that? Like, what would I have to do?
So the biggest thing is when you go to, let's just start with your example on the Board of Supervisors. So, you're still a citizen in Sonora, and you have a lot more rules that you have to comply with now, and you have to be more careful about. You didn't lose your First Amendment right to be able to speak on your own behalf and form opinions and things of that nature. The caveat, though, is they have to be represented as even though you can identify yourself as a city council member, you have to expressly also state that you're speaking for yourself as a resident and you're not speaking for the council as a whole, because the only way in which to do that is to take an action to the actual council and have that position be memorialized by a majority. So again, you can go and do those any time that you want. I think the area that gets the trickiest is if you attend a committee and there's already 2 council members there, and then you become like the third, and the thing that you want to comment on is within the purview of the city. And so even though I told you earlier that you didn't have lesser rights by getting elected, in some ways that's one of the examples of where you actually do. Those committees where there's 2 people there, the suggestion is to find alternative means of trying to communicate. For instance, submitting like a letter instead of appearing in person, to kind of limit the exposure that you're talking about city business there. That being said, it's open to the public, and there's ways to get around it. And so we could talk about those specific situations based off of because it is very specific to what committee you're talking about, the issue that you're going to bring, and stuff like that. So there's ways to do it and not get in trouble. But generally speaking, the rule that we suggest to council members is if 2 council members are already there, then don't go, or at least if you do go, don't speak.
Remain completely silent, and that would be okay.
Yeah, it would be okay if you remain silent and it's a public meeting.
Yeah,
right?
just for the sake of, I really like being able to attend meetings firsthand, so I don't have to get that secondhand commentary. And that example I cited would be a great example of, it's very relevant to me doing a better job given my position,
Yep.
In various other committees. So it's really just born out of, I'm not here to dictate, what the agenda is of Vision Sonora. It's purely just to make sure that I'm the most informed representative that I can be. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So again, we can always find a way to make sure that your voice is heard, right, without breaking the rules. That in that situation, we just take it case by case, and we kind of, as you know, we've done already, we just talk ahead of time and say, okay, do this, this, and this.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the handbook? On the stuff that we went through? Okay, the handbooks of rules and procedures. Okay, our handbook flat out is deficient. It's out of date. And, well, nobody says I'm not pretty straight. And it needs some work. So it's currently our accepted practices, rules, and processes for administration of council, matters. It sets forth kind of the expectation for council member conduct and council meeting procedures. Candidly, I think that there needs to be more in there, both for the council members and for the public to kind of know what the rules that they're going, what are the rules, what are the expectations, and a little bit more definitive detail. Our current handbook, I would call, even though it has pages, legally pithy. So it's a little thin. I think we're a general law city, so that means that the California Government Code fills in wherever we haven't adopted rules that specifically take us apart from it. So it fills in kind of the gaps. And we're subject to it, and that's frankly how most of the cities in California operate because it's very expensive to operate as a charter city with very few additional advantages. You really have to be a fairly significant size or very affluent in order to kind of be able to justify that. Our handbook is comprised of rules that are some of which are memorialized in the city's municipal code and some of them in the California Government Code. And again, that's our guiding document, of how we operate, how we do business. It's our guiding principles. Chapter 2 kind of the handbook kind of goes through the general powers and duties, kind of memorializes the way that we do business in terms of the mayor rotating and 4 council members. We don't have any formal rules as our mayor. It's more custom and practice that we followed for the entirety of time I've been here and most time before that. So, and that chapter details the terms, the periods, the election processes, and the duties of the mayor and the pro tem. The mayor pro tem essentially kind of filling in for the mayor if the mayor is absent, and the general duties and authority of council, which is basically what we went over in the beginning about setting the guidance and who you hire. And terms that are in your handbook, it's a 2-year term, which is how it's always been since I've been here. Chapter 3 goes over city council meetings, and it kind of goes over the different kind of meetings that we can have, which is our regular meeting, which is something like tonight, special meetings, which is when we hold a meeting to kind of, because we have something that requires a single issue that either requires immediate attention that can't wait for the meeting, the upcoming regular meeting, or is of such precedence that it deserves like its own meeting to just kind of go over that without the distraction, and the time commitment that it would involve. And then there's also emergency meetings and study sessions. Emergency meetings are going to be incredibly rare. And the standard for an emergency meeting, because people use the term emergency meeting and special meeting often interchangeably, but they are not the same. Emergency meetings, we can just go down and we can go meet the second that we can get together, and it's really for matters that can't wait 24 hours for public noticing for a special meeting. They're of that urgency. So we're talking about like a paradise type situation, tragedy that would happen, or a major, road collapse, fire, and whereas maybe Melissa has a certain authorization, monetary authorization, and you have to authorize more money for emergency services, and it can't wait 24 hours. And I think study sessions are kind of self-explanatory. So I kind of went over the voting requirements for our operation. So most things are going to require a majority of so 3 votes out of the 5, irrespective of how many council members are present. The items that require that are ordinances, resolutions, or any expenditures of money. That's overwhelmingly like 90% of what you all do. And so, those are going to require 3 of the 5, even if there's 4 folks here, or even if there's 3 people here. It would just mean for something to pass, all 3 people who are present would have to vote for it. The mayor has the mayor or a majority of council have the ability to call special meetings, and that is a exemption in the Brown Act that you can call for both scheduling, availability, or for calling a special meeting. Now, you can't talk about you can say why you're calling the special, why you think we need a special meeting. So as an example, Councilwoman Merrill could call the mayor, well, mayor's a bad example because he can do it by himself. Councilmember Hawkins and Councilmember Sagerstrom and say, we need a special meeting on this. Are you supportive of that? And if the three of you said yes, then a special meeting is called and you would just notify it. The mayor can do it on his own, and then myself and Melissa as a city administrator can do it on our own. And the same thing applies for cancellation of meetings or continuances. And then we lay out in our agendas the whole instruction for receiving public comment. So if people want to submit something in writing ahead of a meeting, it becomes part of the record. And that's done up until the second that public comment is closed. Somebody can hand in something written. It's reflected at the record. It gets passed out to everybody in the council. That's chapter 3. Chapter 4 goes over to quorum. So this chapter describes the circumstances in which a person may be removed from a council meeting, and it describes the general behavior and expectations of meeting participants. This is one of the areas where we are deficient in the sense that there's new state law that it doesn't reflect in terms of the process that you go through in order to be able to kick somebody out of a meeting effectively. Our typical process is going to be that if anyone kind of becomes disruptive, the instruction will be for the request, whether it comes from one of you or whether it comes from me or if it comes from the city administrator, would be to the mayor or whoever's operating the meeting, to ask them to be given a warning that they're being disruptive. The mayor or whoever's the chair would then give the warning to that person, and if they continue to be my advice would be at that point in time that we would call a recess, and then if it continues, then our chief or whoever's representative of the police department who acts as the sergeant at arms can kindly ask them to leave, and not so kindly if they refuse. So that would be the process that we would follow here. That's probably a little bit more liberal, and it's a little bit easier under law to get somebody out if you really wanted to, but that's kind of the process that I want to make sure it's well documented and that we have a process in place. That's not completely reflected, obviously, in there. And I'd like to have that improved. And I would also like to see some of the procedural components improved in terms of the mayor recognizing who's going to speak and whose turn, who has the floor, and then giving them giving the opportunities. One of the biggest things that breaks down decorum in my a few decades of experience now. I don't want to date myself too much, but I have a young face. Is that not understanding the public comment. So public comment is they have the floor to, whether it's the public or then the interaction with council, to be able to make their statement for you to take into consideration. And it's our job to listen. It is not the opportunity for a debate. And when I say that, when I say debate, that would actually, while there is a time to have debate for council, it should be an organized debate where folks are recognized and it's time, and we want to, and everybody, and one of the goals of decorum is that everybody should feel comfortable speaking and nobody should feel intimidated. And so we want to make sure that people are recognized, people don't interrupt, they listen. Yes, Mayor? It's your meeting, so you don't actually have to.
Yes, but I dislike interrupting so in that sense though, you're referring to debate among council members and not with the public, that once
So I think there's two components.
and we can set it up sometimes so that there is a public debate where we allow them that back and forth.
So
I-
I don't
I'm
ever,
unfamiliar.
so my recommendation will never be to allow a public debate with the public.
Okay.
Because they are not this is their opportunity to be heard,
Mhm.
but they are not elected. They are representatives of their own opinion. They are not representatives of the city of Sonora in the capacity of having been elected. It's like, if you want that right, then you have to go through the election process to represent others. And you have to get other people to buy in that you're going to be a good representative.
Yep.
And so, you know, my advice has always been, and we've conducted meetings this way for a really long time now, which is people are heard, and then for the most part, whether it's staff or the council, we wait till everybody talks from the public, and then we address those at the end.
Okay.
It keeps the adherence of time, and it also de-escalates situations so that we don't have things that become, particularly as we talk about controversial issues, we stay safe and tempers don't get out of control. The individual who's speaking in public has the opportunity to feel like they've been heard. And then there's very clear delineations of, the council being able to retort, and then it's their job, if they're still here, to kind of listen. They don't have to agree with it, but it's their job to listen, and then to allow you to all go into what should be an organized decision-making process.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was just a point of clarification, because heretofore, we've always just done it where the public had a chance to voice their opinion and preference, but afterwards it came back just to the council, and that's,
No, and we've done this way for a long
Yeah.
time. It's explaining to people kind of why we do it.
okay.
And and partly it's a safety measure, and it's also to make sure that everybody's treated equally and given respect.
Okay.
The public needs to understand that they're, in the context of the decision-making process, they have their time, but you guys get to make the decision, and that's why you guys have more time to deliberate, because you have been charged by the voters to be able to make decisions on their behalf.
Thank you.
But the goal amongst council members is to keep that decorum still and to have it be done in an organized way so that emotions are able to control, and people are just respected, and people don't get talked over and stuff like that. So I think that, that's the goal. That's what an ideal meeting should look like. And it is something that the mayor and to a degree, I as the city attorney are kind of charged with enforcing. So that's why you'll see the mayor sometimes interject and say, okay, wait till this time, or completely appropriate. But I would say of all of our sections in here, this is probably sufficient.
If I could make a comment. One of the reasons I encouraged this meeting was really more for the breakdown and review of the council itself. I think we're fine with the community and do an excellent job with the community. One of the things that the California League of Cities put out was taking the lead, how city officials can and should welcome disagreement, but we can do it civilly. And you kind of passed over section L, interruptions. A council member once recognized shall not be interrupted while speaking unless called to order, unless a motion to raise a point of order raised by another council member, or unless the council member speaking chooses to yield to questions from another council member. I think there's some breakdown there. I'd also like to see us use the term point of order more often. Furthermore, if you can just keep track of my list here. Challenged while speaking. A council member challenged while speaking shall cease speaking until the point of order is determined. The council member shall be permitted to proceed if ruled to be in order. And then flowing over to the back, courtesy to other council members. Council members shall accord the utmost courtesy to each other, city employees, etc. Staff remarks as to integrity or abusive comments and statements as to motives and personalities. So I just want to make sure that you don't run over that real quickly, because I think it needs to be addressed.
So we're going to be going, so the actual motion practice, I kind of cover a little bit later when we go over Rosenthal's rules of order, and how we adhere to them without necessarily strictly adhering to them. So I was kind of going over this. So this is kind of like more the global kind of, This is more the global point of what's actually in chapter 4 in the handbook as it currently stands. Um, but you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the areas that we could probably do a little bit better. I mean, I think we've always been a little bit loose in Sonora on this, just because, you know, is kind of being more clear on who has the floor and making sure that that's kind of, you know, forced. So, and again, I think it goes to the same component. Everybody's allowed to have different opinions. No issue there. Everybody's allowed to ask really hard questions. And I mean, clearly you're 5 different people. You're going to come with 5 different sets of experiences, 5 different sets of perspectives, 5, you know, life experiences. And so the goal is to make sure that as elected officials and as representatives and as reflections of the community, that we showcase, you know, our best. And that's by making sure that each of us has the opportunity to talk and make our positions known. And while we may say that we disagree on something, that we do that disagreement in a civil way, even on emotional issues, right? That we do this in a civil way, and we do it in a considerate way. And again, probably the easiest way of doing that is just making sure that we're not attacking each other, but you guys are pretty good about that part for the most part. But it's also making sure, I think probably the easier thing, because we get excited, and I have a very excitable personality myself, is making sure that we give our colleagues, which is, you know, your colleagues, because I'm not elected, the respect to be able to complete their thought and their process during their time, because there's always time for you to, if somebody has a different opinion, to be able to express that and to not make it personal. But, you know, just follow the simple rules of treating people how you'd want to be treated. I think that, you know, that's a pretty good guiding principle. And I think you're right. Like, you know, we could be a lot better about like point of order and doing those things. And I think that will only make us, you know, kind of stronger in terms of what we do. There's no harm comes from a little bit of formality, you know?
I was going to interject that to some degree it's difficult to be too formal, really. Our founding fathers, which were often meetings of just a few members, essentially, were still always very formal and very, very strict with that. And it lends gravity to the decisions and the process. As a short anecdote, when I was replaced or succeeded as the president of Friends of the Library, the new president, instead of just talking from the table, got a lectern and always spoke from the lectern, and a few other items like that, formalized what is generally a very informal process and meeting, and it lent gravity to the issues. I think that's good.
Yeah. I mean, realistically speaking, if you look at it, the rules are just there to make sure that we don't interrupt each other and everybody has the ability to speak, and we don't, while we disagree, we don't attack each other. It's not really that complicated, right? So, so I think that that's just the guiding principle and things of that nature. So that's decorum. Again, I think it's probably one of the most efficient ones. We're going to go into the point of order kind of stuff like in a minute. So any other questions on chapter 4? Okay. So chapter 5 is procedural rules. This is going to be covered in 2 different sections. We're going to talk about it just because this is where it's in the handbook. But also we're going to talk about it when we talk about Robert's Rules of Order. So the final section of the presentation, so I'm just gonna save that part because we're gonna go over it. But rules for discussion of meetings is withdrawal of motion, voting. We do voice votes on here. I will say that I always, as the mayor knows, ask for roll call on what I'll call more important votes, not in the sense that the subject matter is, but if it's a controversial issue or something that involves a lot of money or potential litigation, I'll ask for roll call votes so that there's no question as to how folks voted. So voice voting is what we predominantly use in Sonora. We haven't always done that, but that's what we predominantly use now. And that's completely appropriate. We just have to make sure that we go through all three options, which is yes, no, and abstentions. Failure to vote constitutes an affirmative vote. So, like if you fail to vote, you're still present for purposes of a quorum, but it doesn't necessarily mean yes, right? So it just means that you're still present and stuff like that. So things can die if there's a tie. Abstentions from voting, we've seen that too. Abstentions and recusals for conflict of interest so that you can be present, but you can go in. You can lose a quorum if you don't have, if it requires 3 and there's only 3 of you here. And the votes will automatically be, and this is one of the weird things that you're the only city I know that has this. Votes on matters that are tied will be automatically continued to the next meeting if one council member is missing. I don't know how that got in there. It's a weird, like, little deal. Typically, if you have a tie vote, it fails, and then if you want to bring it back, you always, you can at the next meeting, but it doesn't happen by matter of your rules. But that's a little bit of an idiosyncrasy here.
Do you see any specific downsides to that? Or is it just a interesting
I just
quirk?
think I think I'm not a big fan of laws that don't need to be there. Like if you want to bring something back,
Bring it back.
every council member can put something on the agenda. You all have that right. Now you have to give us enough time to be able to write a staff report. So if you walk in and and it's the day the agenda's going out, we always have to have time to be able to create a staff report. So that's the guiding limit. And sometimes staff reports are more complicated than others. So sometimes it may take 2 or 3 meetings to gather all the information to be able to put it together. And while you have the right to put something on the agenda, it's staff's right and obligation to be able to explain it in a neutral way for the entire council. It's not staff. It would be inappropriate for staff to just rubber stamp, regardless of how it is, a council request is from that perspective. So if that makes sense, because our job as staff is to present stuff in a neutral way for the entire body.
So the question was sort of directed at to whether we should just remove it as our interesting quirk sometime in the future if we do review this and rewrite it.
It would be my suggestion that it's removed because it is unnecessary. And I don't think anything should be in your municipal code or in your guidelines that doesn't serve a specific purpose. If you can already do what it wants without having the words in there, then its reason for existence doesn't exist. But, so you have some idiosyncrasies in there, but just know that if you abstain, if you decide not to vote on something, which failure to vote is effectively the same as an abstention, you still count for quorum. The threshold of it passing is still the same. So if there's not enough aye votes, then it will fail, and when we have ties, it fails. But we might have to, under our current rules, we'd have to send it to the next meeting again if one of you is missing. So any questions on that one? I know Councilmember, I saw you on the whole failure to vote constitutes an affirmative vote. So
Yeah, I was
wanna
just
make sure
wondering
I
if you
was-
could clarify like that affirmative. It just means you're like, to me,
Purposes
affirmative.
of quorum. For purposes of a
Okay.
quorum, you know, so if there was only 3 members here, if you failed to vote on it, you still have a quorum. So
That's all that means
correct.
in terms of the interpretation of the intent
Yeah,
behind the
it's
vote.
like an abstention. It would be treated like, failure to vote is treated like an abstention. There's different semantics, but effectively it means almost the exact same thing.
Okay. Would one be like more cowardly than the other? Like, you know, I mean, I don't mean to kind of be funny, but you know, it does take, sometimes it takes bravery to cast a vote.
I think sometimes abstention has a certain connotation to people. And so, for example, let's say we're just voting on minutes and the person wasn't at the meeting and they don't feel comfortable. They don't want to abstain. They don't want to do anything. Like, so they just don't, their vote isn't cast for anything. So, and so that failure to vote acts as an abstention, but it would be memorialized in the minutes as a failure to vote.
Okay.
Present but not voting. So that kind of makes sense for everybody? Any other questions on that part? Again, oh, Casey's got a question.
Did they have to explain why they're not voting?
They do not.
Okay.
They are encouraged to, for transparency's sakes, but you all are elected and you can figure out what. you
Would
wanna say.
that be a difference between a failure to vote and an abstention? Meaning that like if I interpreted, what is it, number 5 under B of chapter 5, the abstention recuse, it says, no, I'm sorry. It's number 4. A vote to abstain except for an identified legal disqualification shall be counted as an affirmative vote. A council member shall state a reason for abstaining prior to doing so. So if you do vote in abstention, you do have to state a reason. If I like,
Under your guidelines, it's another idiosyncrasy you're supposed to.
yeah, because I mean,
But
I
you
see
could
the
also
word-
say, I have my own reasons and I'm not going to really
okay,
disclose.
the reason I just
It's semantics with your current.
yeah, because
handbook.
Tracy brought it up. I did skim that, and I interpret in the legal sense shall to be an incredibly affirmative in terms of you have to do this if you do that. If
You have to say something.
yeah, okay,
I'm abstaining. I have my own personal reasons as to
Okay.
why I'm doing. The personal reason is your reason.
gotcha. Thank you.
So, again, that's an idiosyncrasy of your current handbook. It's not something that largely exists. And the failure to, the decision to say why you're not voting on it, to me, is part of your own First Amendment rights. Like, you got elected, and if people think that you should be saying more, then that's reflected if you want to run for office again, right? Or people coming up here. So it's almost like sometimes the lack of speech can be a First Amendment right, if that makes sense. But you can also you all make your own rules. So if you want to say that you have to say why you're not going to vote something, you can make those rules and diligently enforce them if you want. You know. So, okay, we good here? Chapter 6, commissions and committee. You have your appointment process. People serve at the leisure of the council. They can be removed by the same way that they were, appointed. So we'll just leave it at that. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And then we'll get into parliamentary procedures unless there's any other questions about the handbook. Again, I think you have some more pressing needs that are going on that we're well aware of that are going to be both meaty and lengthy in time. But this, in my opinion, the handbook needs to be on this. Okay. Parliamentary procedures. So what are they? I mean, there are discussions to proceed and have meetings proceed in an orderly and fair manner. The goal is to keep the meetings fair, impartial, and objective. When I say impartial, I don't mean that there's not strong opinions. I mean it in the sense that everybody is treated equally and given that, equal opportunity to speak. That doesn't mean you take equal time, right? Because sometimes people will be more lengthy than others. But that you approach it and that the public is given, and anybody who has an application is given the due process, which means they have advance notice of the meeting, the opportunity to be heard, and full disclosure of all relevant information. information if they want, that they're asking for. There are the two dominant forms of parliamentary procedures that are followed in the United States are Robert's Rules of Order and Rosenberg's. Did I keep saying Rosenthal earlier? Sorry if I did.
I think you said Rosenberg.
I know newbie always gets on me because I always confuse it. But Robert's Rules of Order, which people are most familiar with. It's if you operate in the nonprofit world or some of the corporate world, that's the meeting procedures that are most commonly followed. Rosenberg's rules were developed by a Superior Court judge out of Yolo County with input from a lot of cities and jurisdictions. And it's more it's more California specific, and it's really the dominant form of procedures that are followed by public entities in California. It is based largely on Robert's Rules of Order, while also recognizing kind of like some of the unique attributes of public entities and some of the restrictions that we operate in to kind of differentiate it. Because while Robert's Rules of Order are, forms a wonderful background, it's not always the best in terms of, how a government entity can operate in California. With that, we do not strictly follow Rosenberg's Rules of Order, and let me explain what I mean by that. In our code, we specifically say that while we follow these as our general guideline, we do not strictly adhere to them, and they are not our guiding principles for the city. And the reason that we do that is I never want to get stuck in costly litigation, spending taxpayer money, litigating whether the motion was done in a proper sequence, meaning that any kind of technical deficiency that might happen in a meeting, we don't want to expose ourselves and taxpayer money, take money away from public safety, take money away from infrastructure to fight over whether or not a motion was done perfectly or not. So that's why we don't do it. It means that we follow it in spirit. We follow it without legally following it, being legally required to do it. What it means is that there's majority rule in public meetings, we protect the rights of minorities and absentees to have their voices heard, that there's effective and expeditious meetings, and that it's done with order, decorum, and fairness. So I think to Councilmember Cruz's point, where you get into the point of orders and making sure that we kind of go through that process so that, folks are not interrupted, they have their opportunity to be heard, and it's all in the process of being recognized by the chair, who's mayor in this case with us. They're a little bit simpler. It means that every participant is entitled to participate, whether there's a moment for everybody, whether you're a member of the public or whether you're elected, there's a place for you to participate. It means that only one person can have the floor at a time. Again, part of that is so that people don't feel intimidated and they feel like they can come and speak. Even council members feeling like they have the ability to speak, and it's a safe place for them. And so what they're saying can be heard without kind of distraction, and and so that's kind of why we go through that. And really, it's about the mayor and to a degree me just making sure that only one person has a floor at the time, and that the person who's speaking is the one who's been recognized. And that the presiding officer needs to operate in a impartial manner. So the mayor can't show favoritism. He can't always call on Councilmember Cruz first, and never call on Councilmember Segerstrom or interrupt Councilmember Segerstrom and take the floor away from him, meaning like as council members you have equal time and you get to finish your thought, and then somebody else can be recognized. So no favoritism, no cutting off other council members. And we got to make sure that the personal remarks, again, are that they're based off of the policy that's being presented, and not personal or condescending or demeaning, because there's no policy that requires anyone to be demeaning in the process of forming an opinion. You can articulate your position and why you have that position, and you can vehemently disagree with somebody without making it personal. it can be personal to you, right? But making it personal. There's two different kinds of decision-making processes. You guys make predominantly what's called legislative decisions, which is making or interpreting policy. Examples of those are zoning changes, general plan amendments, approving expenditures, and it all applies equally. And then there is more administrative or quasi-judicial decisions. That's more specific to an applicant, and it happens a lot in planning applications. And the latter is a more formal process. It takes on kind of a quasi-judicial, that's why it's written that way, quasi-judicial nature, and it has a lot more formality to it in there. And that's because you're dealing with people's due process rights as opposed to just making a legislative policy decision. So there's a heightened set of rules when you do that. We don't do a lot of that. We're 98% of the time in the legislative decision-making category. And so how does it work? So, you've got staff presentations. So even if a council member asks for it, staff's going to do a presentation. That presentation is going to be neutral. We'll certainly recognize why somebody brought a request an item if it actually came from a council member. Most of it doesn't. It comes from, staff is what generates most of the items that go onto the agenda. Then there's a decision-making body questions to staff. So we do the presentation. You guys ask some questions before it goes to public. If there's an applicant, then there's a presentation by the applicant because they have the right to have it framed in the perspective that they want. And then we open the hearings for public comment, and we have some time limits that exist. We're pretty judicious in letting people speak, for the most part, as long as they need to. Then we have final comments by applicant where they have the opportunity, if we have one, for them to come in and basically sum up or respond to some of the comments before they're foreclosed from doing that. And then we have additional questions by the decision-making body of staff, public, or the applicant. And this is also the area where you get some staff clarifications to things that were made or staff responses. And then you have the closing of the public hearing, and then you have the decision-making process that you guys go through. Again, the idea being that as this process all goes through, even if you don't know the right terminology to use, whether it's point of order or something of that nature, always just asking to be recognized by the chair before you talk. So that's a way to keep it kind of simple. Motions and general procedures. So members must obtain the floor, which is recognition by the chair. So this is the easiest way to do it. Just make sure you're looking at the mayor, for us, or whoever's chairing the meeting. If it's one of your subcommittees, right? Like if you're the chair of it, then people asking you. Making sure that you're recognized. If somebody wants to make a motion, then they would make a motion. I'll move to, or you guys do that pretty well here. Motions must be seconded for consideration. We've done that. All of you know how to do that. Once seconded, the chair will open for discussion by the legislative body. So that's the last little opportunity for questions. A lot of times we've done that before we get to this point. And then there can be, again, recognized debate on the issue. There can be requests for amendments. There can be discussion on the proposed amendments. Then you close discussion, and then you go to a restatement of the motion. That's why a lot of times I'll clarify and make sure, like when the whereas I just read publicly, so we all know what we're voting on, because that's the worst thing, is we want to make sure that the record reflects that everybody knew what they were actually voting on, and we don't get to a situation, hey, I wouldn't have voted for that if I knew that. That's not what I thought I was voting on. And then you vote on the motion, and it's done either by voice vote or roll call vote. Aye, no, abstention, and then if somebody doesn't fill any one of those gaps there, it acts as effectively as an abstention. And then there's the announcement of the results. And let's talk about continuance versus denial. And I'm going to say that this again goes through some of your idiosyncrasies. Specific direction for revision to a project with the explanation that be brought back to council. That's a motion for continuance of an item. And sometimes we'll just continue an item because the changes that you have requested are so substantive in nature that it precludes us from taking action at that meeting, meaning that we have to re-agendize it with a new language because it's so comprehensive. If the applicant is unwilling to make changes to the project or the city council doesn't believe the project can be reconciled with the applicable standards or regulation, even with the changes, then it's denial. So continuance, you're going to bring it back. Denial, it's dead. Under the Sonora handbook, again, we're kind of going back to that chapter 5. The procedural rules establish the list of possible motions at a public meeting, and those include motion to fix time to adjourn to. So as an example, if you, irrespective of where you're at in your agenda, if you have to leave by a certain time, then you can make that motion at the beginning of the meeting. You can always make a motion to adjourn even in the middle of an item. That's appropriate motion. You can make a, oh,
No, and now it's good.
is it? I scared it. Or Tracy scared it. A motion to take a recess is always appropriate, again, even in the middle of an item if you want, but all of these have to require a majority vote. Motion to raise a point of order or call for agenda adherence. So any council member could, or appointed official in the conduct of the meeting, if they feel like they've been interrupted or something like that, it's a point of order, or you can call, even if it's not them, they can call for the mayor to kind of like basically pull the meeting to order and get the rules to be recognized.
Get back in the lane.
Yeah, and then the motion to table, which is effectively, depending on how you do it, it could act as a continuance.
I have a quick question here. You said motion to raise a point of order. Now that's a term. Are there other terms we should be using?
Well, I don't want to get caught up in the formality of it. I think point of order is always basically the terminology that I would encourage you to use. There are a lot of different terms that you could use, but I think even if you don't remember the term point of order, then I think the easiest thing is just to ask the mayor, hey, mayor, can we start following the rules? And I think that, that's enough for the mayor to be able to kind of reel it back in. And it's pretty easy to figure out when we've gotten a little bit ahead of ourselves. So, and then a motion to table, it depends on if you're tabling to a date certain or not. So it could be effectively killing something without killing it if it doesn't have a date and it never comes back. It could be tabling it until certain changes are made, or it could be just tabling it to a date specific. Motion to continue. So there's a lot of different things that you could do. What I didn't put on here is reconsideration. So in order to make a motion for reconsideration, you have to have been one of the people who voted in the affirmative. So somebody who was in the minority can't make a motion for, is prohibited from making a motion for reconsideration because you were in the minority. So you can't just keep trying to get a revote on it if you're in the minority. But if there's a technical mistake that was made, somebody who's in the majority could do that. And a motion for reconsideration is only good for motions at that meeting. Once the meeting is over, it's no longer a motion for reconsideration. We would just treat it as a new item. Any questions? I know. This is the fun part.
Well, we've been waiting for this for a long time. Thank you.
So we want to open it up for the public, see if they have any questions, and then we can close the item.
As the public has heard, we would welcome any public comment and or questions, I imagine. You did lose a few of our public. So, yes, Mayor Pro Tem Sagerstrom, please take the floor.
I do have a question. So are we revising this, or are we looking to it with your comments?
So I think the goal of today was simply to kind of go over the rules as they currently exist on the book, so that we're all kind of on the same page as to how meetings should be conducted and kind of the expectations, and then also to let the public know, because I think we've received some feedback that maybe the public doesn't think we're following some of our rules. So we just use it as a general kind of like, hey, let's just go over this again and be kind of comprehensive in our approach. So that was the goal of what we were trying to accomplish, tonight. It is my recommendation, although I would put it in medium priority because I know what we have on our high priority list, that the handbook be revised. There's nothing in the handbook that I think is a fatal flaw that requires immediate attention, but it is deficient and it shouldn't be, right? And so, so it is my recommendation that it's on the list. I personally would categorize it as a medium priority thing. And the only challenge is right now you have a lot of stuff in the high priority.
We have lots of high
list.
priorities that are going to consume staff time
Yep.
and resources.
So that's just my explanation of it.
And another question, is the handbook on our website? So the public knows the rules by which we are conducting meetings? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So, calling now for public comment. None online. So, seeing none, I will close public comment. Thank you very much, Councilor White. Consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar are considered routine and will be voted on in one motion unless a council member or member of the public has a question or wishes to discuss an item. In that case, the item will be removed from the consent calendar and considered separately.
I actually have a question about the Gold Rush Muni use path. Was there anything we needed to know about that? Melissa?
Nothing new to the project. It was a grant application that's been approved by this council, an award that you are aware of. This is just partnering with the Tuolumne County Transportation Commission so that they could provide the staff support for the delivery of the first phase of the project. As you are aware, we're in the process of issuing our RFP for a city engineer, and we do not have the capacity internally to be able to deliver this project. In order to meet funding deadlines and timelines, reaching out to our partners at TCTC was very beneficial to us to be able to do that.
Was
But
there,
nothing new in addition to the project. It
Thank
is
you.
just the first phase project approval and the environmental documentation phase.
so there's no map for the citizens to look at?
No, not
Okay.
yet, just the initial grant application that
Thank you.
identifies the project location. And then as they move forward with the environmental and the design, we'll be bringing additional information back to you.
Great, thank you.
Please, Councilman Merrill.
Just to clarify, this is a great, item 6 was a good move for us to do. And I just want to make it clear that this council, I believe, will have ultimate jurisdiction over some of those design elements and major aspects of that project. It's just that TCTC is handling more of the administrative nitty-gritty portion of this. So I have it on very good authority that Darren and that board would be more than receptive to our input on that project.
And we are grateful for TCTC dealing with the nitty-gritty details as you framed it. That's a lot of staff time and effort. So,
And just to reiterate what Andy was saying, so the council's aware, the city of Sonora is still project lead. We still have the financial obligations and the contractual obligations to Caltrans. Our authorization to proceed is in our name. And so we still have the liability for the oversight and the management of the project.
thank you. Any public comment? Mayor Pro Tem Sagerson, were you getting
Yeah,
my attention?
I did have a question
sorry.
about item 5. This would be a new contract. I did notice that there is some stream cleaning going on currently. That would not be this contract with Nate's.
So your eyes on the ground have new information. So I wasn't aware that we started any of this initial work, but I can check on that.
Yeah.
This is a new contract, and it's for ongoing annual maintenance.
And I just had one other comment about item 6. I mean, at the beginning of my term, we did have a presentation on the Gold Rush Trail with kind of a vision of what it was going to be like. So, you know, I'm delighted that TCTC is taking it under its wing.
Thank you. Now I will call for public comment on the consent calendar. And seeing none for the second time, we will close public comment and bring it back to the council.
I'll move to approve the consent calendar as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Signify with an
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition, nay? And I will note that one of our members, Councilman Hawkins, had to leave earlier, so we have one absentee now. Passes unanimously. Monthly reports. We received monthly reports from all of our departments. Is there anything further to add to our our reports? I'm seeing no sign in the positive. We thank you for them. We also have two communications from the Tuolumne County Board, County Behavioral Health Advisory Board speaker series on the opioid crisis and other health topics. And I'm glad I don't need to say that 30 times in a row quickly. Also, the communications regarding the City of Sonora community outreach for the local hazard mitigation plan, for which we would encourage people to participate and learn how to reduce our risks here locally, and especially the fire risk, because that's what a lot of it will deal with.
Thank you. So just in terms of the local hazard mitigation plan, I would encourage you to share this on your social media, this community. This will serve as our community outreach and community workshop. We found the farmers market to be the most effective ways of getting attendance and capturing the attention of our local community, and also encourage people to take the survey. Online surveys have been very successful for the City of Sonora, a great way for us to get feedback. So please share that information with your constituents. We would appreciate it.
Do you have the artwork?
Well, and I believe we were able to send these documents to you via email, so I'll just make sure that.
Oh, okay. So I can just download that. Okay, thank you. Duh.
Cool. Thank you. Well, now we arrive at our council member reports. Why don't we start with Mayor Pro Tem Segerstrom?
Okay. During your absence, Melissa and I met with the Fire Safe Council, the Tuolumne County Fire Safe Council, and Karen Caldwell. And the city is looking to expand its collaboration with the Fire Safe Council. And there was interest on their part for project management and implementation on grants, which would be very helpful to the city. I attended the Yes Partnership for Suzanne, and Rob Eggers from the Tuolumne County Superintendent of Schools did a report and they do an annual survey of students about kind of a monitor of depression, drug usage, tobacco usage in schools. And there's some progress in mitigating these influences in the 7th to 9th grades, but the upward trend in the 11th grade is still occurring. I was interested, there's about the same number of students in our public schools as there is in the city, about 5,500, 10% of our population. They don't report on private schools or homeschooling, but I just was kind of amazed at the small, the small number of students we have, at least in our public schools. Somehow you just think that, we're exploding, and we are not. And anyway, I will be going off to the California League of Cities Conference Wednesday through Friday, and I'm really looking forward to that and meeting other council members and mayors from other cities. And we've been working on the newsletter, and I believe we are close to completion on that. So that's my report.
Thank you very much. I always enjoy your reports. Councilman Merrill.
Yeah, let's see, got a few list of things. I guess first and foremost, the TCTC accepting the agreement with us, the City of Sonora, to take on the environmental impact and project design phase. Planning of the Gold Rush path was huge. I'm really excited about that. I think that could be an absolutely transformative project for our community. And I'm also pleased to announce that Groveland Community Service District has also collaborated with TCTC for their Lebroni Park, and they're intending to build a trail from that park into Pine Mountain Lake. Again, very exciting. And just so this council is aware, I think Caltrans is incredibly receptive at this present moment in time to collaborating with, our committees like Vision Sonora and our planning committee regarding Highway 49 infrastructure. I did, as I'm sure many of you received, some correspondence about current lighting fixtures and things like that at the intersection of Washington and Stockton. So they actually seemed open to the crazy idea of getting a second pass at potentially augmenting or changing some of the aesthetics of some of those major intersections, although it realistically probably wouldn't be until 2028, 2029 that we actually break ground on that huge $63 million project. But nevertheless, it's something that is being talked about. It's in the pipeline. Let's see, we've got, I attended the grand opening of the Rural Resource Center at the County Enrichment Center behind what used to be Tuolumne General Hospital. I just wanted to say that it was a huge turnout, much greater than I ever would have anticipated, and was easily one of the most diverse populations, both from a age perspective, identity, race. It was a really cool, very, very diverse turnout. And they're available for peer support, healthcare navigation, suicide prevention, overdose prevention, and as of now, I think they have 2 employees and are quickly growing. There was a poster at the Enrichment Center, and again, this is our Tuolumne County Behavioral Health putting this together. They have up on the wall in that building 5 fundamental concepts for the service that this Enrichment Center wishes to provide. And I just wanted to share those because I thought they were really cool. Just some very neat ideas. The first being community collaboration. Second is cultural competency. Third is client family driven. 4 is wellness focus. And 5 is integrated services. And I gotta say, the fact that I just finally went to this enrichment center in my 2nd year of being on this council, I feel like is kind of I'm doing my community a disservice. I didn't even know it was there. It's an incredible resource to our community. And I just wanted to thank both Tuolumne County Behavioral Health and the Resource Center for opening that building up to a huge group of people the other night. It was a super fun event. Also, not this last weekend, but the weekend before, I had the pleasure of playing the Bear Fest Music Festival up outside of Pinecrest. And I got to witness the lightning strikes and the storms that we got caught in there a few weekends ago. And I had a moment there because like the power went out and we were sitting there, getting lightning strikes down on us. And I was in a dining hall full of a bunch of strangers. You can call them coastal elites or whatever. But it felt really good to like be completely disconnected from technology and just kind of have that moment to break bread with complete strangers. And, we got to actually talk about, oh, hey, you're from Sonora and a city council member. And let me tell you, I think I stated it before, so many of them want EV chargers in Sonora. So I think we might be able to get some of that sweet Bay Area money up here if we try to develop those incentives. But it just got me thinking about how sometimes, I've heard that, sometimes social issues, on council can be contentious and everything, but going back to that poster, the cultural competency and, how this council has recognized things like Welcome Back Veterans Day and, recognizing Juneteenth and, not recognizing, but at least talking about Pride Month. I think that's really cool because, it exposes us to cultures that we may not have previously heard about. And it's really important to know that all of this is a part of our community. This is what we're here to do. And again, I just think it's an incredible privilege to have the opportunity to talk about social issues, to do what I did when the power went out up at the festival and say, hey, I don't care who you are, you're welcome at my table. And that's kind of how I've always viewed democracy, is we're stronger together. We're stronger as a united, welcoming community, as opposed to trying divide lines between each other. And I just, it might seem divisive talking about social issues, but I really do think we grow as a community by at least addressing them and recognizing those people in our community. Just wanted to leave it at that, I guess.
Thank you, Councilman Merrill. Councilwoman Cruz.
First of all, I want to thank Anne for standing in for me at the Yes Partnership. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And next, that was my first committee. My next committee that I am on is Visit Tuolumne County. A report from Katie Kirkland, the Director of Sales and Marketing, let us know that Visit Tuolumne County, Sonora specifically Sunset Travel Award, gave us a Best City Getaway in the Western United States. What about that? They had an audience of $1.4 million to be featured in print edition in the October-November edition. So that's a really great team over there. I also stood in for the mayor at a LAFCO meeting, which was quite boring. And we made a decision and then they rescinded it. So there you go. And then also another committee I belong to is the Central Sierra Economic Development District, another acronym, CSEDD. And for those of you who don't know, it was formed as a joint powers authority and established as an EDA recognized economic development district. It encompasses 5 California counties: Alpine, Amador, Calaveras, Mariposa, and Tuolumne. And it includes the cities of Angels Camp and Sonora. So it partnered with the CED, the Center for Economic Development, and Cal State Chico, and the Chabin Concepts Consulting to identify key stakeholders to ensure a broad representation of the region's population and interest. Upon gathering information through various interviews and community discussions, they have a cumulative report that's supposed to last 5 years out, very much like our Citygate, but only for 5 counties. This economic plan, they say, will promote a stronger, more resilient economic region to withstand both economic and natural disaster disruptions. It has an outline of goals and objectives, and it also suggests implementation. And we meet at the Motherlode Career Center, which I'll give them a real plug, that they're really a wonderful resource in the community, because no matter what age you are, you can go there and find your mission and your purpose. They have amazing resources there to help you go to trade school or, again, find your mission or purpose, whatever that may be. It's a great resource. Check out the Motherlode Career Center. That's it.
Thank you very much. I also want to take one moment to thank all of you for filling in for different committee assignments for which I would normally be present. I have been fighting or working on the Lightning Complex way up in Orleans, Northern California, where the mountains are almost so steep that they're vertical. I have never been on steeper ground. And I always feel comfortable leaving the city with a very able council and staff. And it's really reassuring. I was actually boasting to some of my dinner mates that I do not worry when I leave, that we have good people across the board. So thank you very much. And that I adjourn the meeting.
Recording stopped.